Hello and welcome to another episode of How's the Shared Living podcast, the podcast where we explore the people, projects and ideas shaping the future of shared living. I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And I'm Deenie Lee from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And apologies from Dan this week. So last week I was lucky enough to attend the CUBO Summer Conference, and I've come away buzzing with ideas and questions about that very important part of the shared living asset classes, university accommodation. And I know Deenie has massive FOMO, but is super interested to hear this conversation and take part in it. So we'll be discussing the importance of university and private partnerships, the impact of AI on students, commuting students, and hopefully, if we've got time, the allocations conundrum as well. And to help us answer those questions, we're delighted to welcome Helen Rutherford from Montfort University, Sue Pimblett from Leeds University, and Joe Hardman from University of Lancaster. Thank you all for joining us this morning, early on a Monday morning, after you've been very much part of CUBO conference last week. So hopefully we'll re-energize you and remind you of all of the great things from last week. But can you introduce yourselves as well? And just tell us one thing that stood out from the CUBO Summer Conference this year. You can cast your mind back to last week. So Helen, let's hear from you first.
Good morning, everyone. As Sarah said, I'm Helen from Montfort University, the Associate Director for Campus Services. And I think the big thing that stood out for me from the CUBO conference was the challenges we're all facing, and that everyone is kind of in a similar boat. And it's really good to kind of appreciate that you're not doing this alone. So it's like real camaraderie that we all felt about the commercialisation, but also how we make sure the student experience doesn't suffer in these quite challenging times.
And Sue.
Hi, my name's Sue Pimblett. In my day job, I head up all things marketing, sales and communications at the University of Leeds. And with CUBO, I'm the CUBO chair-elect. It was such a brilliant week last week, so many great things. But there was something actually that the Vice-Chancellor from Warwick said, which really stood out, because it's not often that you hear a Vice-Chancellor, sort of talk to, the kind of commercial world across universities. And he said customers is just not a dirty word. We should really be thinking of our students as customers. They pay something, they have expectations in return for that. So it was actually really refreshing to hear a Vice-Chancellor say that. So I'm hanging on to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a standout moment for me as well. And last but not least, Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Hardman. I'm Director of Commercial Services at Lancaster University. And for CUBO, I lead on the research portfolio. I think the thing for me is right at the end of the conference was fundamentally, the world changes, and if you want to make changes, get happy with uncertainty was the thing for me. Is uncertainty is the world is uncertain, and we have to embrace it rather than run away from it and fear it too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're going to touch on some of those key aspects of that later on in our conversation. So to kind of kick off, and I know, Helen, you kind of alluded to it already, but the conference sort of centered around the idea of reimagining possibility and finding commercial models whilst also improving student experience. And I know Felicity Hannah in her guest keynote listed a whole load of challenges, including affordability, capital projects, asset maxing, which was a new term on me, which I loved, and changes in student lifestyle. But what are the biggest challenges and changes that you're all seeing in today's students?
I think for me, it is, like Sue said, the commercialisation and the customers, that people now expect certain things for the money they're giving us as a university. I think it's how we meet with those challenges, but also what does that cost us as a university? And the student lifestyles, they're now not just coming to university for 3 years, they're now coming to university for 3 years, having to get a job for the cost of living. They are looking at the value for everything. They really want high value for money as well. So how do we meet those? Also, we've got commercialisation aspects we need to speak, we've got revenue to generate, and it's all those kind of transparency. I think it's one of the big things about what students want in the lifestyle. They expect to know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and also how they can get involved. I think it's a big thing for me.
Yeah, for me, I mean, we may well talk about commuting students in a little bit more detail, but that is a big change, and it feels like it's growing and it's happening quite quick, and we still don't really understand it enough. That kind of growing cohort of what we class as commuting students. So commuting students, just so that we're all on the same page with that, this is students who might well be living at home or living away from university, or just not living in sort of halls as other students may well be. It's difficult to kind of get a standard definition of them. and really getting at the heart of how can we make sure that they feel just as included, just as involved, get that sense of belonging that students who are living at halls do, because they're surrounded by the fantastic Res Live programs that we have. How do we create that, or how do we create something for commuting students to help them maximize their time?
I think there's a bit of a contradiction, though, and it depends. Commuting students are more significant for some institutions based on location, history, and a number of things. So if you're in a big city, there are more likely, it depends on what your demographic is in terms of commuting, makes a big difference. So for someone like Lancaster, that is actually more of a challenge, because there isn't the number of people resident within sort of a regular commuting distance who are going to look at that. So for us, the biggest challenge is actually the overall, does the model work full stop? And I think there is a big question. Catering for commuting students isn't just the same and slightly different. Sorry, I am going all over the place here. You've got to really think, I think, much more fundamentally differently. So it is, what is the package? It's not just, your student offer for commuting students is a traditional minus a couple of things. You've got to think very radically different. I think with apprenticeships coming in, with the fact that actually I think people may be dropping in and long-term dropping in and out of study, these sorts of things are going to fundamentally change. But if you are somewhere that does, and I describe it as the full fat student experience, the sort of the traditional residence experience, then actually your problem is the numbers full stop of people who want that is likely to decrease. And in particular, is the international student market that's been in many ways both nationally and internationally really challenged, whether that be by government policy, international events, whether that be by countries such as China boosting their own higher education, which means the number of people who are having that traditional experience is really likely to reduce, let alone come 2030, the number of 18-year-olds is then going to decrease. So we are going to see something significantly transformative. The problem is we don't know what it is, because it can't be just an experience is, well, you've got a student experience, but you're not living in accommodation. It is something fundamentally different, and we need to reconstitute the whole thing, I think.
That's what I took from Paul Richmond's presentation, was that there's no point fighting it. It's happening, but also, like you said, Joe, that they are different. Just want to be a little bit provocative for a minute, because we want to kind of, I guess, bring this back to what this means for accommodation. Is there a risk that to making the commuting students' experience so much better is going to actually put them, making it a very easy decision, I guess, not to live on campus, and therefore you've got a commercial impact to accommodation? I'm just going to throw that out.
It could be a race. The phrase "the race to the bottom" on that is that everyone actually, in effect, does that. I don't think it will happen. But if you use Oxford and Cambridge as the example, they are likely to remain traditional. They are also likely to remain the top elite. I think you'll see some other places like LSE with very high numbers of international students who cannot do commuting. So I think what you'll see is potentially a split between people who will do the traditional full fat and the people who will do more commuting. And that's really a split that's existed for a long time, but will become more and more pronounced over time. But the truth is the people who get the most out of higher education will be people who are at the top institutions with full fat living in and everything, which actually means that is likely to continue, but it will be on the edges for a number of institutions, which just becomes a major crisis.
I think it's really difficult to replicate things like the hidden curriculum bits that happen outside of lectures, the networking or peer conversations or study groups or the campus events and things like that. And then, as Joe coins that phrase of the full fat, I think this is also wrapped up in I think we as a sector just need to be a lot better about articulating what the value is of studying for a degree. Yes, the academic side is one thing, but then there is all this other stuff that happens around it, the full fat, as Joe would call it. But that you're getting value for, and I think we've just not been good as a sector at articulating that enough. And given the hard time that HE's having in the press, or where people's minds are at, deciding if it's worth the overall cost. I think we just need to dial up that messaging much better, which inadvertently that's kind of the bits that are more difficult for commuting students to more easily access, and have that full experience from.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where it's the added value bits, and they're the bits you can't quite quantify with numbers. And at the moment, we're in a very big numbers game. And it's one of those ones that's the added thing to do. The Res Life program, all you see is a cost of what that staff costs, but you can't then go into the students and say, well, it costs us this, because that's what we offer as a whole, as like AJ said, full fat university. So those other bits, so those social skills, those people skills, how you interact with other people from completely diverse backgrounds, they're those things you can't tell someone how to do, but what we offer is how you do it, putting into the shared accommodation these different situations, and how you then take that as an 18-year-old coming out at 21. You've developed all these skills you didn't know you needed to develop, but then looking back, you're like, well, I can now go and talk to anyone. And we've all kind of heard about the different generations that are coming through where they're losing quite a few of those skills, and that's what I think coming to university helps you develop. So it's that kind of added value that you get, but you can't just put a figure on that, really. So I think that's one of the hardest things that we've seen, is how you demonstrate the value of that. And as we heard in the conference, quite a few Res Life programs are unfortunately being cut. And that's the biggest thing we offer, I think, as a university. But then how do you then put that as a commuter student, where you don't want it, it's just Res Life minus a few things. It's another kind of value we want to add. So I think it's like a whole juggling thing. And I think Sue said we're not particularly agile at moving quickly, or we could be, but decisions made at certain levels that don't allow us to be that agile in a commercial setting that we need to be. I mean, more business minded as well.
Sorry, I think in a world where AI is flattening out knowledge, where we've got used to a world where Google has given us everything at our fingertips, and AI is going to not only give it our fingertips, it will do a chunk of the processing. The cultural capital and the broader skills and the critical thinking and the things that university gives, and I think critical thinking works outside the lecture theatre. It's where you, in your residence, it's the conversations, it's the socializing, it's the clubs, it's the sport, it's all those things that come together, which you will never have if you are just using it as a commuter. It's really difficult to have those things. So it's not saying you can't get an education, but what you won't get is the full part of it. And it's one of the problems we have with NSS, is NSS records everything factually about stuff about the academic and doesn't record the other bits really very well, which actually are an incredibly important part. But as Sue says, we do not sell that well enough. And that is a real challenge. And we don't sell well enough the fact that students still earn more than their contemporaries. There is still a benefit to doing a degree, but everything's being reduced down to the only thing is what you earn. And that is not what the world is about for me.
And do you think that this, like you say, Joe, that kind of that traditional way of studying is not really, there's becoming a new tradition of how you study? Do you think that is a short-term thing that we're finding, and that actually people will go back because they'll realise actually they're missing out on all those things that you get to go away and study? Or do you think that this will become traditional and it'll stick and it'll stay?
I think it will split. As I say, I think it will split. What you will see is that universities will specialise. I was around with universities and polytechnics, and that sort of split between the two side things. I think you will see a split more between commuting and a full resident, full fat option. I'm not saying that people won't do both, but I think you'll see a split, because, as I say, I do believe that the full offer offers students more in terms of experience, in terms of development, in terms of their overall cultural capital and likelihood where they will end up in the long term, in their own well-being and everything else. That means that there will be a chunk of people who can afford it, who can see its value, who will still stay with that. What we don't know is what the balance will end up. Is it going to be going back to the sort of 70s, 60s, 70s, where a very small percentage of people are having a traditional experience? So we end up with Oxford, Cambridge, LSE and Imperial, and that's it, where you have the full fat experience and everyone else does stuff. I don't believe that's the case. What we don't know is what the balance will become. What we do know is the size of the whole cake is also reducing. So you've got two things happening here at once, and then throw AI in. So you've got AI, commuting, and a smaller cake.
Yeah, I do wonder, when you're talking about kind of, I guess, not publicising that great experience and what it can bring. I still see, you know, in my peer group, I'm a parent of teenagers. There is still, I think, a little bit of a hangover, probably from our generation, where the student experience meant going out partying and drinking. And that's not important. So why would you spend money on accommodation, you know, when it's so expensive? Do you still get that feeling that kind of, I guess, wholesome cultural well-being truth of what I believe is going on university campuses is so different to what a lot of parents are experiencing, that kind of messaging has almost got to be, you know, a juggernaut turning? It's quite a new message, I think.
Yeah, I think it is that very much generational thing. Said with Paul was saying, they are different people, they are different generations. They're not just us younger. As I'm like you, Sarah, that's quite a lot of my university was they're going out on a certain night, you went to a certain place, and it wasn't normal if you weren't going out. Whereas now I think it's much more acceptable not to go in, not to go out, not to kind of turn up to a lecture on a Friday morning really hungover with everyone else. So I think there's much more freedom of choice of not to go out with our students. So we need to kind of how we accept that and what we do to support that as well. I think it's a big thing for us on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, there was something that Felicity Hannah said in her keynote, and I won't repeat it because she probably won't thank me for it. But she was reflecting back on her time at the University of Edinburgh, and you know exactly that. You know, it was about going out for drinks. A Thursday night meant a certain thing, you know, a certain venue or whatever it might be, and how just different that is now. And that's not saying, you know, no students do that now. Of course they do, but you know the numbers and perhaps the frequency that they are, you know, just because of the added pressures and just also social changes with that kind of drinking culture, which you know, as you mentioned in Paul Redmond, you know, his keynote was brilliant, you know, going through those different generational habits. And you know, what our mindset is just completely different. It's a completely different thing. It's a completely different world for different generations.
Interestingly, one of the things is, I think we went through a phase in this country in terms of peak idiot alcohol, which was sometime in the 90s, early millennium, where it was licensing law. And I've got a whole thing I can tell you about why mobile phones and the influence mobile phones impacted on the way people socialized and alcohol. And I think if you went back prior to that, I'm certainly not saying in my generation people didn't drink, but there was a far more balance between the time that was spent doing societies or political activity or other things. And I think there was a phase where, and I could blame It's a Scream Bass Chain for doing it, for arguably for really pushing that sort of alcohol drink hedonistic lifestyle that hit the country, and students just had more free time. But on top of that, they actually had access to more money. So I was a student before loans even came in, and money was tight, but there was also less opportunity to spend money. When loans first came in, they actually threw a lot more money into the system to start with, because people had access to easier money, which then people drank in a culture that was promoting drinking. That's no longer there. Young people are more likely to not drink. I mean, not, you know, was it 40% or something of young people don't drink? I don't know. This is maybe not a true stat, but it is certainly believable. I see kids these days who aren't drinking. We've chased them out of pubs. We've, you know, all kinds of things that's made a change in the way the world's worked. They don't drink. But also the other thing is that the amount of money they've got and the access to money, and being told all the time this is expensive and you can't afford. So they're also much more sensible about things. So yes, there is a percentage of students who will go out and be fools with alcohol, and that's fine. That's their choice. But there's more who now are incredibly serious minded, but are still getting those other things around their experience around living away from home, getting involved in societies. In one sense, possibly going back more to what I saw when I was a student, which is a slightly more balance. I would say the politics is the one that isn't there these days.
I think also as well they're working more, aren't they? So actually that kind of in between time between actually studying and doing what you need to do is much less, because you've got to fit work in amongst that, which I was the last generation that went before the fees increased. So and I got a grant to go, and that kind of all disappeared. So it kind of that has had a massive impact on what that lifestyle is, and therefore they're going with a very different mindset, I think, than my generation certainly were.
Let alone work. Study itself is more important. Our library is one of the most popular places on campus. They don't use it for books. They use it for, I would call, social studying, because it's not behind a single desk, not talking to anyone. It's round a table, headphones in, a group of people working and studying together. I did an open day at our university the other day, and I was talking to someone and said, yeah, it's quite like how we behave in sixth form. So they're coming through. We have people coming through who are more tied into doing their academic work than certainly in my day. Again, that's definitely a difference. The seriousness with which they take study, and therefore in terms of what they need in terms of facilities. And that, again, it's social studying. It's much more difficult to do that if you're not living in the same place.
Yeah, no, they're all really, really interesting points, and allude to what we wanted to talk about as well, about AI. It was a really significant part of the conference. It wasn't just in the keynotes, but it was in the workshops as well. And actually, Deenie and I this week at the Property Marketing Strategist, we're launching our new research into AI with a webinar this week as well, and soon to be followed up by a report. So it's I don't think you could probably go to any event or conference about students and not talk about AI. And clearly we failed within probably the first 3 minutes of this podcast. So it's clearly very significant, really. On your campuses, are you already seeing AI making a positive difference, or not negative?
I mean, I can kind of talk from my own personal perspective. We've got Copilot integrated into our kind of office packages, and just from a personal, administrative function, how much time that saves. But it gets to the point where AI will do a summary of your emails or do a summary of a document, and then that somebody else has probably used AI to write that document, and you're just like, am I actually even have any of us actually connected in any way, or is it just AI talking to AI? So that bit kind of scares me a little bit, of where it's going. But obviously, from the kind of admin perspective, yeah, it's super helpful. But for students, it's just there, isn't it? There was a lot of chat at the conference how they're just used to it. For us, it's a thing we've got to learn. It's it's maybe a little bit scary, but for them, they've just grown up with it, or they're growing up with it, and they're kind of happy to embrace it, and they can see lots of positives about it. Less about the negatives.
Yeah, the skill is delving deeper into the AI. So that kind of the critical thinking bit of it, of questioning the AI. I don't think any of us are there quite yet. I'm quite skeptical about it. It's like, well, I'll just check it. I'll just proofread it, make sure it does make sense. Whereas I think from the students, they're like, no, this is the answer because AI gave me the answer. So I think for us, it's that deeper delve into, well, where's it getting the information from? Is that correct? But I also don't want to be obsolete in my job. And that, I think Sue was saying, is like, well, it's just AI talking to AI, and do we know what they're saying and doing what they're doing, and maybe they're going to plan to take over the world. I think the biggest thing that I found from the conference is the way to use AI in the prompts you use, and that was much more of being very specific with it. So you're doing a bit more work than I quietly appreciate, and you do is like, make this sound less scary and more friendly in my tone, as I use mine AI for. But this was like, this is the situation setting, the context, and then you can use AI a bit more manipulate it a bit more was a big takeaway for me from the conference. I'm just like, create a slideshow of this. But it's that kind of summary document. And it's one of those ones where I've probably taken quite a long time to write a document or a paper or a business case going through. And if someone's then just going to use AI to make it into a one page, again, where do I add my value for that? And maybe thinking about the students, they've got to be careful of quite people using the tools to spot AI in their assignments and things. So I think they probably are aware of it, but I don't think we fully use it to its.
Can you see it working in a positive way, kind of in res life, without, is there a place for it, rather than replacing community building? I don't know. Can it work in res life or accommodation settings?
I think so. For trends, looking at trends, there's a big one on kind of what does the data show us and how do we then use the data. So I think for res life, there's that one. There's also quite a lot of time responding back to frequently asked questions that aren't on the ones you'd have thought of when you obviously create our documents and our guidance about coming to university, coming to accommodation, as is what are the frequently asked questions that you can respond to. I think AI is very quick for responding to all the students on a mass comms kind of basis as well. But then it's one of those ones where you can put it out there. If students don't read it, you're then still back in the how do they interact with the information we're giving out there. But I think there's lots of things we can do.
I think on that point, and this comes back to like the generational differences, I'm a bit old school. I'm like, I need a person to speak to. I'd like to pick up a phone to somebody, and have that kind of human interaction. But actually, what we see is that our students, they don't like that. They don't like speaking on the phone. They'd much prefer, they're quite happy with a chat bot, as long as it's kind of been programmed with intuitive answers, then they can get their answers quite quickly. And so, yeah, it's kind of understanding of those generational differences, and actually, having a chat bot isn't just sort of a cost saving or an efficiency thing. Actually, it's genuinely giving them what they want, but it might be different to what we want as coming from a different generation. So yeah, just constantly thinking about that, and just the more that we do to kind of ask, to research, to understand those differences, what students want, and not make presumptions. We just got to be so cognizant of that, because the world is changing fast. That's one thing I took from it. And those generational differences are really quite stark. So we've got to try and keep on top of it somehow.
I think one of the things is that absolutely there's no question that lots of Generation Z, and I think Alpha and probably Beta in the future, will be so used to talking to computers that this will become their go-to in many ways. Though a while ago everyone was talking about, well, people will stop doing anything other than talking to computers and no one will ever type anything again. That's not happened quite as quickly as some people were suggesting. I know it does happen and there's quite a lot of it, but it's not the sole way that people. So I think what we will see is a range of different reactions that different people have with AI. One of the things I would say, though, is to be slightly careful, because yes, people do prefer often to interact with an AI or not a person, but that's one of the skills that people are losing. And I think you come back to one of the reasons to live in accommodation with people is to meet people and to actually create those social skills. Do you know what? I really love donuts. I could eat nothing but donuts because that's what I prefer to eat. And I would I would die one way or another, either of overweight or the fact that it's not a balanced diet. Just because someone prefers to do something doesn't mean to say that's how we should always do it. And I think one of the things that we need to do is offer up, it's not an either or, it's an and the AI needs to be human centric and be supported by humans at the appropriate time. What it can do is enable humans to be brilliantly human. And that's what we should be using AI for, not of just replacing. Now, it may replace some jobs, but those jobs, we need to have that authentic human interaction at the appropriate times and in the appropriate ways is going to be really, really important.
I think that is what came out of our research, actually, is that the way that kind of young people are viewing AI is very nuanced, and there is a lot of distrust sometimes there in that actually I don't want it to take over everything. And there is that kind of viewpoint of actually when it gets to this point, in a process of booking a room or whatever it is, I do want to speak to a human. And I think there is we're in the AI bubble at the moment and the boom. And actually we do, like you say, Joe, I think have to take that, not with a pinch of salt, but we have to take that with a viewpoint of actually what is going to add value and what is the things we want to keep, not just everything must be done on AI, because that's not what the research is saying. And from speaking to kind of people in our focus groups, they're very balanced in how they're using AI. They're very balanced in their understanding of its limitations. And I think that it's really important that we understand that there is a nuanced approach in how that generation of viewing it isn't all just, it's great, it's brilliant. That they are genuinely looking at it from a perspective from a critical thinking perspective of actually, how does this help us, and where is it, do we need to watch it, and do we need to prepare for kind of the changes that could happen with this?
I think we discussed it on the last week's podcast with Bart from a co-living perspective. It's kind of, if you are saying that you're going to take some of the like really boring jobs away, the really repetitive, administrative heavy jobs for AI, then I think customers, residents, students will want to see, well, what else are you do? Where else are you adding value? If you're, because, we hear a lot in kind of in PBSA as well about, things like FAQs or parcels, well, actually they're really quite rubbish jobs. So, if we get AI to do that, then the people can do something more valuable. Well, what is that thing? Because, if I'm a customer and AI has taken over some stuff, I'm going to want to see better maintenance responses, better res life, better, the stuff that people can do. I want to see that if AI is going to take some of the really boring stuff away. But I think, like Deenie said, it's nuanced, and technology is changing all the time. So we're still, what we're talking about today will have been surpassed tomorrow and next week. And it's hard to keep up with that in a commercial environment, I imagine.
I think one thing just to say, you mentioned parcels just as a boring thing. And whilst I'm slightly skeptical about this internal debate, a parcel can be a point of contact with a human if you're picking it up. And that point of contact, now, I actually don't think that's one of the more useful ones, but some of the things so picking up a key at the beginning and the end, at the beginning of the year, I think that's one of those things that a person, yes, you could put it in a locker and someone can pick it up. In fact, you could do it digitally. You haven't even got a key. You get it on your phone. You don't see anyone. The idea that you've got a greeting when you arrive and putting someone there as a point of human contact to say you're the person I come back to. So looking for sometimes the task that even AI might be able to do, or the automations may be able to do, put a person in it. My fear is the race to the bottom in terms of reducing cost. People will strip out some of those meaningful per people centered things, and that's something and I'll be honest, to resist where possible. I think it's really important, again, if you're going to live and get a full student experience, people have got to be involved. Otherwise, absolutely, if it's just AI, sit at home in your little bubble, never come to university, never leave your room.
There's one thing that I wanted to come on to that maybe AI is the answer to. Belonging, community and intentional resident life programming were recurring themes across the CUBO conference as well. One session that probably stood out to all of us was the research from GSL about ethnicity and religion, which focused on the fact that students want to live with people with similar lifestyles to themselves. What came out quite clear that it's not actually about living with people of the same religion as you. I think what their research showed is that people wanted to live with people with similar lifestyles. Maybe that's rituals, holidays, dietary requirements. We've seen similar research from investors in students, and actually research that we've done at Property Marketing Strategists keeps coming out time and time again that people want to live with people that share the same values. Is this something that you think universities are going to try and grab hold of a little bit more, some kind of more intentional matching? Because AI could definitely help with that.
Could definitely help with that, couldn't it? It's almost you're so beholden to the student knowing those things about themselves, because you might well go, on your application form and you're like, I like people, I like socializing, I don't mind a bit of noise, and then when it actually comes to it, you're like, oh no, actually that's a no for me. And that's sometimes quite difficult because you perhaps haven't lived away from home and you don't know what those really important things are to you. So, absolutely, from a technology perspective and AI helping, yes, I think it can, but the information that goes in, I think that can be quite tricky for students, to be completely aware of, all of those things that make them tick or that are really important to them.
Well, I think, don't know, at university, don't we have a bit of to put them into challenging situations as well? So if it's always comfort and always what they know, what they think they know and think they want, then how do you develop those kind of other skills? So at university, not to go too far extreme, but should we put them into situations where they don't know anyone really, or they might be mixing with people from completely different backgrounds in ethnicity, diversity, cultures, views in the world? As Joe said, that there's a lack of politics and politicalization a lot now in universities. So you do have people with differing views. How do we should we be doing that actually in some of the allocations? Should there be kind of actually, should we put people in a mix? Is that something we should be doing? So they do have to think about conflict and disagreements and how you deal with those, part of your kind of development as a person. Should we be kind of doing that side as well? Even though I know obviously the research would suggest that maybe you don't want to be doing that. And then do we look at retention to making people happy all the time? But then, as we've all found out in life, it's not always happy. It's not always unicorn and rainbows. So you do have to deal with conflict in person to person as well. So should we kind of looking at that aspect of it in our allocations?
Doing a heavy lifestyle type allocation based, and you've chosen that's the way you want to do it, AI can probably do it for you more effectively. I think if that's what you want to do, I think there is an ideological thing going on here. Is, do you believe that university is about getting people to mix and meet people they don't know, gain that experience, broaden out their life, and in which case putting everyone without it almost acts against that. But there are clearly some things where there are food requirements and other things which it might be helpful, and so it's a really challenging area. I would tend towards actually we mix people up. So you do a quiet flat. Well, what's your definition of quiet? And what's my definition of quiet? That's quite challenging in terms of those things. So the moment you start creating these sorts of things, but I think there's some very important places you can do it. And I was doing an open day at the weekend, and one of the things is autistic students, for example. The way we do it is actually we have a box and people write. They've got special requirements of any kind. In fact, it can be anything they want to write in that box to try and we will read that box and go through and say, actually, we clearly understand what you're getting at here. Because often, I think Sue almost said it, people don't necessarily know themselves that well, and mum and dad might have written it. So there's a set of things. Around. So one of the things for autistic students, so one of the things we don't like is putting students in first year students in studios, because we don't think that is a great experience for a new student. But for some autistic students, a studio is absolutely the right answer, because they need that space that's entirely theirs, that they can get away. Now, for many of us, that doesn't feel right, but it is absolutely the right thing to do. So I don't think AI is going to be able to finesse that, because you need to have the conversation. And I think you need to work. For me, that allocation thing is you need to have the information in the first place, and then to spend, and do you know what, this is one of those things, the human time to properly look at it, to think about what the consequences are. Are you comfortable with having a flat which is all Chinese students? Is that something you want to do? And actually, it's the way I think you want to curate your campus. And I think that's an important thing, but understanding what the needs of the students are. It's slightly paternalistic, I'm aware.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we started this conversation talking about the customer, and the demands and needs and the expectations are getting higher and higher. And I think this is probably an example of where that is quite prevalent in accommodation settings, really. And, I understand all of your arguments, Helen, for kind of putting students in a realistic kind of diverse situation, but from their point of view, they're probably like, well, I'm a customer, I'm paying all this money to live here, I want a great experience, and I don't want, I don't want conflict and and anything difficult. And it is I wonder if that's one of those things that is so culturally different and generationally different that it's going to take a while, a few years, maybe AI intervention, to really kind of work out what that means for a campus population. Because you're right, Joe, you want to curate it, but I guess from a customer point of view, they want it curated to suit them, not to suit what the university wants, or what the accommodation campus wants. Just want to move on, because I think we could probably debate this all day. Is just about investment in student accommodation. There was some sort of, I guess, topics around partnership models. I attended the workshop hosted by SFG, and they shared data about significant demand for student accommodation, but also that more than 60% of university-owned accommodation that they have assessed falls below expected standards. There's obviously build costs, planning delays, and a drop in kind of 15 to 19-year-olds by 2029. So is there really appetite to keep adding beds that may be too expensive and too late for anyone to afford once they're built anyway? And therefore, what can you see the future of kind of leaning on those private partnerships, perhaps maybe more so than universities investing in their in their own accommodation? Is it still a priority?
I think it's a priority that we provide rooms. Where those rooms come from, I think, is changing completely the model. Quite a few universities now becoming very risk averse, especially with investments. I think that kind of partnership model is where people are moving to, in terms of partnering with either a known supplier on the market or creating a new partnership, with the university heavily invested and involved in it, shaping what the accommodation, the service looks like, is a model I'm seeing more and more across the sector. I think with changing standards in terms of room expectations, now every student expects an ensuite. That was like the premium when I went to university. You were lucky if you got an ensuite. Now it's kind of that expectation. They don't want to be sharing bathrooms. I've been around with my niece, and she is horrified the fact she might have to share a bathroom. I was like, that's what it would be like, just so you know. So I think you said about expectations and customers and choice. I don't think many universities are looking to invest now into new student accommodation, so they're looking for other options. But also, we've got quite a buoyant market for student accommodation, and we've got lots, especially where I'm based in Leicester. There's loads of options for students. So I think as a university, why would you want to invest quite a significant amount of money when you can go out to the market and offer something out there, as long as you've got a strong partnership? But as a student, you want to think you're part of the university, not living in a separate accommodation. I think it's a big thing. So how do we put our res life programs into these different accommodations, so you feel as part of the community, not you live somewhere else and you go to university somewhere else? It's all still wrapped in one. I think that's the big change we're seeing. They want to feel part of the university. Just so some places have badged up private accommodation with their university logos as a partnership, so you feel you're part of that network and that community, rather than having to go to a landlord per se. But I think there's a definite drop in smaller HMOs and private landlords that we've seen. People are moving out of the market. So it is the big PBSA that we're seeing people wanting to go to.
I think, yeah, I think with universities, it depends on what stock you've got, what state it's in, and so I think it depends on where you are currently. But I think Helen's absolutely right. There's going to be a tendency. Universities are not awash with capital in most cases. There is often an excess of student, or a reasonable balance of student accommodation across HMO, PBSA, and university owned. So why would a university start putting significant money into building its own when it can probably look at partners, and is probably, because of the excess of accommodation in a number of cities, in a strong position to do negotiations? So if you've got 20% too many beds, you will find partners are much more likely to sign up on better terms than they would a few years ago when you were the other way around. So I think universities are in a strong position to drive partnerships, which I think will be why universities themselves won't necessarily do it. The one thing I will disagree with Helen on is the thing about ensuite. We've actually seen in recent years, and it is price based, and I'm not going to pretend that's what's driving it, is an uplift in the demand for shared bathrooms. Now, a modern shared bathroom for a student accommodation is significantly better than what in my day. I think the other thing is just simple things. At our place, if you've got a shared bathroom, someone else cleans it for you, unlike yourself. So and actually a lot of people do see those benefits. And if I could create anything now, it would be more shared bathrooms if I wanted to do it, but you can't afford to do it because you don't get the return on it. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think the chances that a great deal of student accommodation is going to be built across the country seems to me quite low, because although investors are quite stupid sometimes, it seems to me that they will. Sorry, I said that out loud. Given, if you everything, yeah, internal monologue. If you are planning 7 years from now, if you start doing, you're probably not going to have a bed for 7 years. Given that we know the demographics are changing, why would anyone be saying yes to building new stuff right now in a market that looks like it's a contracting market? I bet there are people still doing it because they've got investors on the hook.
Agree with a lot of that. A lot of our research points to shared rooms and shared bathrooms because of cost, like you said, but the quality's got to be there as well. And we're as baffled as you are about the constant narrative about a lack and a shortage of student accommodation. There's void beds in nearly every city, so if that was the case, there would be no void beds.
If someone could work out how to build a shared accommodation at a low cost, then oh my god, they could corner the market. You can't do it, so it's not possible. Therefore, this is the only thing I think is reflecting that there may be an opportunity that a university may choose that strategically it wants to invest into that type of thing and is going to stick a load of capital in that is not going to come from the private sector. But that would be interesting for someone to be looking at a sort of high value for money offer that they are strategically positioning that in the market. You might do that, but that I think would be the only place I would be looking at doing it.
And I think you're right, Joe. I think that's what needs to be built now isn't a tried and tested model, and therefore it isn't something that's being built because no one knows that it can work. And I think, like I said, Joe, it's only someone who's willing to make that investment for other benefits is we're going to see if that happens. So
enhance the student experience, the demand from students, rather than making any commercial gain out of it. And in this market, who's really willing to do that?
I would say invest it if you've got standard, make sure it's the best possible. That would be the shared bathroom best possible is I would be sticking my money in there. In fact, yes. It's also these days it's a great student experience. I mean, I think if I had a child going to university, I'd be going, that's where you're living. Don't care, you might not be comfortable. As I say, I was doing an open day at the weekend and I said to people going, do you have ensuite bathrooms at home for everyone? No. You live with a strange family. You're just going to have a new strange family, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And my stepdaughter is in university halls in non-ensuite accommodation, but for her second year she wants to go into PBSA, but she's really struggled in her city to find anywhere that's non-ensuite and therefore financially comparable to what she's been paying in her first year. And that's another risk. You kind of, I don't know, in a lot of cities you seduce students into their first year accommodation, which is great value and different levels, and then they're free reign in their second year and they can't always find that comparable cost. So I think that is probably the gap you're talking about, Joe. We've run out of time in our conversation today, and we could probably have part 2 and part 3, but we're not going to because you're all very busy people. But Sue, Helen, Joe, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really, really great dissecting some of the key themes. and it's something that the conversation, spans far more than just CUBO members as well. But obviously CUBO has the winter conference towards the end of the year as well. So if anyone would like to get involved as a partner or a member, then do get in touch with CUBO. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe to House, the Shared Living podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. And next week, we'll be back with something special and quite timely, considering the conversation we've just had. And due to popular demand and a democratic vote, the one session from UK Reef you all wanted to listen to was the resident panel one. So Gareth, our lovely editor, has worked his magic, and we'll be able to bring you that session recorded live from Leeds in May. And for the first time at UK Reef, we had a live panel with residents from BTR Co-Living, PBSA and HMO on the same stage together, answering amazing questions from the public. You won't want to miss out, so make sure you're subscribing to House ready for that.